So we are the UK's first rent recognition platform. What does that mean? Hopefully I'll tell you over the next few slides. In terms of the business and kind of, I guess, who our audience is, we are interested in tenants, and we're interested in any businesses that touch tenants. So if you're kind of in that space, hopefully you find this really interesting. And if not, then you've probably got 10 minutes to have a little snooze. I think everyone knows or is aware of some of the facts that I've put up behind me, which is that in the UK there are significantly more tenants on a yearly basis. We have 27 million households in the UK. Today, about 35% of those households live in rental accommodation. In London, a couple of years ago, it tipped over, so actually there's more households that rent in London that are owner-occupied, so that's tipped over 50%. And what I found really interesting is 20 to 39-year-olds, so that kind of area where historically people started to transition into owner-occupied. In 2000, there were 20% of people that rented, and now that is over 50%. So this isn't about solving that problem because, you know, there are a number of people trying to tackle that in good, bad, and frankly ugly ways. But this is about recognizing that people in rental accommodation, so there will be clearly some of those in this room, as well as those that work with tenants, that we are actually trying to just balance up what we call financial fairness. And that's to make sure that tenants can get some of the financial benefits that people that own their home also receive. This is really interesting. So in the back end of 2017, HM Treasury launched a competition called the Rent Recognition Challenge, and I've just taken a quote from there. I've just noticed my slides are down here as well. And then they called us the next day and said, can you make sure you enter? So they'd recognized that actually this problem was a big issue for them. And, you know, without sounding like a cynic, government tend to get involved in issues which ultimately think may help them win votes. And certainly people who rent will ultimately decide kind of who wins the next election. So they launched this competition and they said, CreditLadder, can you enter? Because this is something we were already doing. And then Lord Bird, who's the founder of The Big Issue, who's done an amazing job throughout his career, got involved in the Credit Worthiness Assessment Bill. And this is all about making sure that a tenant's rent payment, and this is the crux of the issue, the tenant's rent payment each month finds its way into the credit ecosystem. So if you are renting, your rent payment should count towards building your credit score, either helping you if you have a thin credit file, or actually if you're slightly more advanced in that journey and ultimately looking to improve your credit position on the way to buying a home. But what is really important, and I'm sure most of the audience are aware of it, is if you are looking to take out a mobile phone contract, if you are looking to find a utility supplier, all the way to taking out a personal loan, your credit position influences how much you pay and whether or not you qualify for the product. And I think the worst example of this is utility companies. If your credit score is not good enough to get direct debit, guess what they do? They charge you more for your gas and electric, which is scandalous. So how big is the problem? Well, each year there is 50 billion paid in rent in the UK, so that's a lot of money. And we have been using technology to effectively ensure that that rent payment ultimately benefits the tenant, but also benefits those that own properties that have tenants in them, and I'll come on to that in a minute. In terms of how the process works and kind of how we use technology, the steps are up behind me. But ultimately, we leverage open banking technology. So what happens is a tenant comes to our platform, or where we are already working with developers or letting agents, we take that information from them, and take some basic details. So name, address, where they live, how much rent they pay. Date of birth is an important data point because we need to match it into the kind of credit profile. They then connect their bank account to our platform and give us read-only permission. And there are multiple businesses trying to use open banking to ultimately deliver a service to consumers. So yes, there is an element of trust that's required, and yes, there is a hurdle to overcome. So to be able to deliver that service, you need to have FCA approval. And I think Paul mentioned to me earlier, it'd be interesting if any of the businesses here are interested in FCA. That's hopefully something I'll be able to talk about. Each month, then we scan the statement, we look for the rent payment, hopefully we find it, and then that is shared with Experian at the end of the month. Where we don't see an exact match, we have some tech engagement, and then we also have some people engagement. So we have some people to basically help understand what's happened. And a typical example is your rent might be £1,000 and we only see an £800 payment. And so we'll go to the tenant first and we say, look, your rent's £1,000, we only see 800, what's happened? Tenant might say, look, the washing machine broke, and the landlord said, just fix it and take it out of the rent, at which point we'll then go to the landlord and say, look, can you just confirm that this is true? And if it is, then we kind of pass it through. We're not here to demonize late payment, so we're very careful to make sure that if someone hasn't paid and we don't jump to the wrong assumption because this ends up on your credit report. Well, let me just flick back. Once you've been with us a couple of months, you'll start seeing a line item on your credit report. Currently, we work with Experian. We've been working with Experian for about 2 years. Equifax, we've just started a trial with, so we should be working fully with Equifax in about 3 months' time. And the third reference agency in the UK was called Core Credit and now called TransUnion, so hopefully we'll have them also by the end of this year. So ultimately, the tenant can benefit and landlords and agents can benefit, and I'll explain why in a second, by ensuring that those payments are captured throughout the entire credit ecosystem and not just with Experian, even though they happen to be the biggest. There's some stuff we're doing which I took off the slide simply because I realized that we've not announced it, and this probably wasn't the place to announce it. So from a tenant perspective, what we call the product is Rent Trace, so that's what I've been talking about for the moment, which is about using your rent payment, which is typically, unless you are a tenant with an extremely extravagant lifestyle, your rent payment will be your biggest payment, and we think that should be captured. How developers, letting agents, individual landlords are using the product is as follows, and this is really important because we have a number of those on our platform. Typically, when a tenant moves into the property, there will be a reference check. And however the landlord wants to do that reference check is entirely up to them. We kind of don't get involved in that process right here, right now. But all those individuals and businesses are interested in managing rent arrears, and all those people are interested in making sure they have, in inverted commas, the best tenants to move in to their property. A bad tenant, I know from experience, is probably the work of 20 or 30 good tenants. So this is how it works. Some agents and developers are making it compulsory, some are making it optional. What they're basically saying is, for you to be able to let through us, you always had to do the reference, and that still stands. We also want you to sign up to the CreditLadder platform. Why do they want that? Because you as a tenant are showing positive intent that you want to pay your rent on time each month to improve your credit score. We can work with about 95% of banks. So if the tenant doesn't want to sign up, it's ultimately up to the landlord to decide whether or not they want that person to be someone that they want to let out to. Some make it compulsory. Some prefer tenants who do sign up but don't make it compulsory. and other people we're working with are just trying to work out how best to use the system. So there is a benefit for the tenant, and we don't charge the tenant, and there is a benefit for, like I said, the developer or the landlord or the letting agent. We're also using technology to do points 2 and 3. Ultimately, they won't be core parts of what we do, but they are services we get asked for, and so we will kind of deliver them. And this is where either open banking integration or FCA approval comes in. So we can, from probably June, initiate payments. So we can pick up the payment from your tenant and drop it straight into your client bank account. It combines the advantages of DD with also the benefits of standing order. So what do I mean by that? Typically a direct debit, if anyone's got direct debit, that's typically taken out 7 to 10 days before it's due to allow for the DD failing. And one of the challenges with DD is you have chargeback. So a tenant in 6 months' time can say you shouldn't have taken that rent. And the first thing the bank will do is give it back to them. And then you have to prove that you should have taken the rent. So payment initiation, which is what it's called, is done as a faster payment. So it's done on the day, so you don't have to take the money 7 to 10 days early. So that's similar to standing order. And what it allows you to do is if that payment is cancelled, we get told, and when we then tell the landlord or the agent that it's been cancelled. So that's taking the benefit of DD, and it's also taking the benefit of standing order. Continuous payment initiation is actually not going live till June. So what we tend to do is we tend to hang at the edge of tech, and then basically as soon as it's available, we're kind of like first to market. And it's the same with instant tenant referencing. If we have bank account connected to us, then combined with some credit score information from Experian, we can run an instant reference check in terms of someone's affordability, whether or not they've historically paid their rent on time. Because in referencing, things like a tenant getting a landlord reference, honestly, is the biggest waste of time. Because if you're a good tenant, sometimes the landlord doesn't want to give you a reference because they want you to go. And if you're a bad tenant, trust me, you get the best reference ever because they want to get rid of you. We've had quite a lot of coverage. So it's there. So that's kind of on the screen. Everything from trending at one point on the BBC homepage through to Which and Money Saving Expert, which from a kind of endorsement perspective are really good for us. We get a lot of sign-ups coming through there. We're doing all right on Trustpilot. We kind of sit in what's called the UK credit category. We are working our way towards number 1. We're at number 3. We keep trading places with 1, 2, and 3, but we're not number 1 just yet. And then here's just a summary of some of kind of the recent highlights. So there's 50 billion in rent annually, and we kind of do about 6 to 7 million a month, which is combined up to the 50 million. So we have a long way to go, but we're determined to get there. We got some direct integrations with banks coming, so tenants can basically just integrate straight from some of the newer banking apps. We got FCA approval for what's called AIS and PIS, so that's the ability to read banking statements and give back to the user like an integrated view of where and how they spent their money. And PIS is what I explained earlier, is where we kind of take the payments. Treasury were very kind and gave us a check for 600K, and we've got a partnership coming up which should get announced if they pull their bloody finger out next week. Honestly, it's been going on for months, and but hopefully release comes out next week. Because part of this journey, if you remember the early slide from the Rent Recognition Challenge, was about helping people get onto the housing ladder. And so what we're going to start doing is actually helping those people get a mortgage to help that transition. So we have the UK's second biggest lender going live with us, and we're talking with the biggest lender as well. And I like this. It was done quite a long time ago. Shouldn't we rethink renting? And I think you heard already from at least one of the presentations earlier, there's a lot of stuff we can do in renting, and this is just a small part of that equation. And that's me. Thank you very much.